Okay, so what we're really looking at right now, like I said in the second unit, is we're taking a look at what causes social change, why societies change, and really what psychologists, sociologists, and anthropologists have to say about these issues. Like in this first activity we took a look at, I just wanted to look at in general what concrete examples of social change we can have, rather than trying to understand the why of social change. And this lecture sort of tries to find a balance between those two in terms of giving you a little bit of the what and some of the theory behind social change, and also taking a look at the little bit of the why theory as well as to why these social changes are occurring. Because I would argue that probably the 20th century saw the most dramatic social change. We've already seen that with technology. And just looking at this cover or this introductory slide to the PowerPoint, you can really see people like Nelson Mandela, who just passed away, had a huge influence in South Africa, although Napoleon's not really 20th century, completely remakes the map of world. We have World War I at the top right there, Hitler and Mussolini, globalization in the bottom, and the sort of the fall of the Brandenburg Gate, and the fall of, or the end of the Cold War we saw just 25 years ago, which is almost not too long ago. So a huge amount of forces echoing social change and everything that goes along with it. And I had this, oh great, now the slide won't work. Bam. So there's a cool quote I came across by Margaret Mead saying, "Everyone over the age of 40 is an immigrant." And I thought that really, really stuck out because of the fact that had you asked that question maybe 100, 150 years ago, definitely nobody almost would have been an immigrant. People sort of grew up and lived and died within the same, at least the same country, but perhaps even the same, 20, 30 kilometer radius, and you don't have this amount of immigration that we see, especially in a place, like York Region, for example. Almost everybody is an immigrant. And it's something that yeah, sorry guys, for you guys watching later when I put this on, there'll be a little bit of a jump back and forth between trying to get a few people on and listening to what they say. But back to what I was saying, like, even 60 years ago.
Sorry, I figured out the echo. You have to close. Basically, I have to close every other browser that's on that group chat with you because they're really delayed. So I closed that.
So you want me to start over
again? I can hear
again?
you just fine, but there's still that long distance call like feeling.
Yeah.
It's fine. On my note, I have everyone over the age of 40 is an immigrant, but then I don't know why.
Did you catch what I said before that?
Yeah. Like this lecture tries to find a balance between what and a theory of why social changes occur. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No, if I ever stop talking, it's mostly to just mention or answer you on the sidebar and things like that. So if I ever stop talking, that's sort of the reason. Okay, cool. Okay, I'll keep going and flying through this thing. Shouldn't take more than 20 odd minutes here. But I think immigration being one of the key drivers of social change in the last 30 years. I mean, I think it affects almost everything I almost do in Markham, to the students I teach, to the restaurants I decide to eat at, to just general cultural influences I take up, which is just a cool little intro, I thought. But actually looking at what is social change, we would consider social change to be exactly what it sounds like, society changing. So anything that changes the way society is organized, the beliefs and practices of the people who believe in it. And I think if you looked at the stuff before, we talked a little bit about social change and why even inadvertently things like society changes. From Emil Durkheim's, he has his functionalism ideas that society changes gradually and slowly over time as things that have a function, maintained or are maintained in society, whereas things that don't have a function are ultimately left out. But you also have that contrast with a guy like Karl Marx, which says, you know, society only changes if there is a major impetus to change. For example, like a massive revolution will change society, and nothing else really matters. So, and then there's people in the middle who say, you know, yeah, revolutions happen, but society changes slowly on an everyday basis. For example, if we use the technology that we talked about earlier, it was a massive and radical change that brings technology in the 80s, but ever since then it's been gradually dissipating and taking over all aspects of our lives. So, you know, the opposite of something like social change is something like social continuity, which means that structures are within society and they're built to ultimately resist this change. And something like the Catholic Church is probably a solid example of a, you know, a social institution that's changing slowly and surely, but at the same time has shown remarkable continuity since, you know, probably the Middle Ages and things like that. So social change in general is just society changing. I don't think I can make it any simpler than that. But I'll ask you a few questions then, since you're on here, Jones. If we look at things like, you know, public opinion shifting in regarding the social issues, like, have you ever talked to your parents about smoking 40 years ago or so, 30, 40 years ago, and the social attitudes towards it? So if you're going to say, yeah, kind of, like, what did they say? Did any of your parents smoke by chance? Did you say why? Didn't really want to. Shoot, what's the connection? Sorry, Jones. Jasmine was just asking to come back. But yeah, you're saying like birth control being different. That's actually, I would say that's a massive social change in itself right there, just because of the fact that, so I'm going to go invite someone here. Jasmine. And yeah, for example, when you're talking about like sexual norms, especially since the 1950s. Oh shoot, let's wait. Okay, go grab Jasmine. Okay, sounds good. But I'll keep going here just so when people watch this thing, they're not super bombarded by all these pauses. But like yeah, like you said, a lot of like a huge sexual revolution since the 1960s is a massive example of social change, something that's really exploded probably Karl Marx-ish, I guess, in conflict theory in the 1960s with the women's liberation, and ever since for the last 50 years has sort of gone by slowly but surely and improved. Like for example, I have a family member who isn't married but had a child, and you know maybe 50 years ago that would have been completely, you know, she may have been completely ostracized because that's something you don't engage in, sex outside of marriage. But now, you know, the child's been brought into the family, absolutely loved, they're planning to get married, and you know that wouldn't have happened 50 years ago. Same thing with smoking, and I ask that because social norms have almost made smoking uncool. Slowly but surely, social changes have gone on that, when I'm talking to my parents about smoking 30 years ago, they both said, yeah, we smoke to be cool. Now a lot of society looks at smoking like, that's disgusting. Why would you actually do something like that? And I think that's the general perception towards smoking as something that's really uncool, whereas 30 years ago that wouldn't have been the case. And even in the bottom slide right there, you see the sort of the thunderbolt between two people. What about social change in terms of divorce? How has public opinion shifted in regard to divorce in the last 20 years? You can post any thoughts on the side, of course. Yeah, I think that's the basic one. Divorce is obviously much more common and accepted as well, whereas before, especially in Canada, Trudeau introduces the divorce in about 1968. I think he legalized it. It's become an accepted part. It's not common for people to say, I'm on my third marriage. I've tried 3 times. Whereas before, it would have been you stuck it. Exactly. Whereas versus before, it's like, gasp, you guys can't divorce. You stick into bad relationships. Even another common one that really needs no question about it, gay rights. LGBT community has absolutely become front and center. Just look at the last Olympics right here. Even putting social pressure on Russia to lighten up the LGBTQ. I can never get the acronym correct, but you guys know what I'm talking about. To put social pressure for gay rights is something that's been absolutely huge. Whereas even just 30 years ago, if someone had AIDS, it would be considered a gay disease. It's something you've engaged in a homosexual relationship, and that's your fault for doing it. Whereas now we realize AIDS is a much more complicated issue than just something that springs up. Thanks, the LGBTQ. There we go. That it's something a lot more common than just simply a gay disease. So again, huge social shifts even in the last 30 years. And if we keep going along,
you might as well just sit with me and use your Word document, because then sure. Because then you don't have to lag.
It's actually kind of cool.
Yeah.
Hey Jasmine, how you doing? Okay.
Even just 30 years ago, something like AIDS would be considered a gay disease, sexual relationship. As you're doing it, now we realize AIDS is a much more complicated issue than just something LGBTQ. There we go. That it's something a lot more common than just simply.
Yeah. So just mute the mic and then. We'll go from there.
Mute the mic on yours. Yeah, and I'll mute the mic on mine.
Okay. So hopefully you guys are with me here, and obviously put any points you want beside there. But one of the things when looking at social changes, one of the first big things that sociologist Max Weber, I think I may have had you guys look him up the other day, or for the first unit. But his sort of belief was that the most important component of social change was basically a leader with charisma. And I gave a number of examples that you can see up here, even something a little bit more old school like Genghis Khan in the top right. But huge 20th century leaders right here inviting a massive amount of social change in their society. Mahatma Gandhi with bringing more or less end of British colonial rule in India. Obviously our boy Barack Obama trying to change America, not sure how successful he's being with that. A guy like Adolf Hitler, one of the one of the major guys in 20th century, and lastly, someone like John F. Kennedy. And Max Weber, he's a guy that sort of believes that you need a leader with charisma, someone who has a grand vision for a grand or large vision for society, someone with like this magnetic persona, this style, strong popular support, and extraordinary character. Someone, I think, a guy like Barack Obama is the guy who was brought in to change America because of strong popular support, whereas a guy like John F. Kennedy is someone who has this extraordinary character and appeal to him. And, this leader, what he does is really place great demands on her followers, promises lots of rewards for their support. So, I don't really need to ask, but I'm sure you guys can think of like hundreds of examples of these strong leaders. Anyone from Napoleon, Mussolini, a guy like Pierre Trudeau in Canada. Would you guys consider Stephen Harper a powerful individual? Just by chance, I'm thinking of recent leaders. Someone like Stephen Harper? No. Why not? So that's an interesting question. If we're looking at the power of individuals, what about a guy like Obama, though? Would you put him as the kind of, or would you put him as someone who's changed society a lot more than a Stephen Harper in Canada? So fair enough, which does ultimately lead into, we'll also take a look in other, when we continue to look at social sort of forces of social change and everything like that, that some people put the power of the individual, but a lot of people look at general societal trends and change. I guess you could call this kind of like the power of individual as change from the top, where it filters down and affects people, versus someone, a lot of people think that mostly change is like grassroots movement, something like we talked about earlier, when we gave examples of changing social norms, like something like the sexual revolution of the 1960s was, and the women's liberation was definitely like an example of a grassroots movement where women were saying, you know, we're being oppressed by men. You know, there are sexual and social standards that are different between men and women, and this needs to change, which puts popular pressure on the top. Versus somebody like you guys had mentioned earlier, the divorce rates in Canada, that really wasn't a social change from the bottom up. It was really Pierre Elliott Trudeau saying, you know, divorce will now be legal. You can legally get a divorce. Women, you don't have to be in these bad marriages, and that change comes from the top, which really opens up acceptance of. So it really opens up acceptance of divorce in the country. So another thing, a sociologist, I'll put his name down here. So Samuel Eisenstadt. There we go. It's German. A guy named Samuel Eisenstadt. He's sort of along the same lines as Max Weber, but he says there exists sort of modernizing elites, like groups of people who create significant social change and influence. Any massive like groups of elites that you really think could change society? Oh, yeah, what's up, Jim? What'd you notice? Hey, Emily. Groups of elites that you really think could change society? Yeah, what's up? Hey, Emily. How's it going?
I'm not allowed to talk. I'm in class. I'm in ILIP.
If you want to, if you scroll up to the top, you can turn the camera off if you don't want to have like, real FaceTime.
All right.
Put your general photo in.
Thank you. Okay, and then which ones don't have lights?
Yeah, and also, Emily, if you're in the chat, just mute the microphone on the top as well, so we all don't get the general feedback from
Hey.
from what's going on in class. Hey. Okay, so like I was saying, I was sort of talking about the power of individuals to change society. A guy named Max Weber sort of talks about a leader with charisma, whereas Samuel Eisenstadt sort of talks about these modernizing elites, groups of people who create significant social change and influence the direction. Some examples that I could think of immediately, especially going in with this idea of technology, would have been someone like, who are the guys that founded Google? They'd be considered elites probably because of their social class. But at the same time, you can see the effects of Google, and they're sort of bringing about massive social change in the way we organize information, access information, work with technology. So that would be sort of one example, I would say, of sort of one example in general of how these elites have really modernized society and brought it forward from there. And I think a lot of times when we go through these forces of social change, what we end up with is, sorry, I'm still here, guys. I'll just try to talk while I'm typing. So what were you lost at, Jones? What's your question? Oh, Einstein is really a guy who both are, if we go back to it, like power of individuals. Max Weber's a guy that said there's like one really, really big leader that's important, that, a guy like Barack Obama could maybe influence change, but more directly we'll take a look at the Adolf Hitler guy. He's a guy that he's the one leader that changes society, whereas Samuel Einstein, he believes in that there's modernizing elites, like groups of people who have power and control and influence society. And I just gave the example of, like, for example, a small group of people at the top of Google, Larry Page, Serge, and there's a few guys who are really changing the way we work and organize information, and they're not one person, but a group of people changing. Maybe you can look at like oil company barons or something like that, someone who has real power in society, and it's a group of them rather than one. So the big difference between Weber, one person really needs social or can create social change, versus Einstein is a group of people. And Dev on the other he just made a comment in Google Hangouts as well, is yeah, you get those people, for example, he gave the example of Hitler thinking of how we can blame the Jews for everything, so he completely changes the social fabric of German society into believing that obviously the Jews are the problem and mobilizing society around that hatred of the Jews, which is a big thing there. Shoot, Jones, you're going to say, yeah, so like, what examples are you going to throw out? Yeah, so exactly like you said, really, yeah, Einstein is like people, if there's a group of people who have influence over our society rather than just simply one person, that would be an exact example right there. So a group of people influencing society, whether that's for the good or bad. And I'm trying to think of other examples off the top of my head, but I'm not really running into anything. Whereas, for example, what we could look at, a guy of social change, is a guy like Steve Jobs. When he ran Apple, he was sort of like the one figurehead. So he'd be sort of that charismatic leader who would impart social change. But now that he's gone and he's no longer really the face of Apple, it's really a lot of elites, like sort of the people at the top who are really running the things. That could be an example of how that may change in terms of how Apple at one time was being changed by one guy at the top, and now it seems to be more of a group. Is sort of another example I could show. And oh, no worries, Dev. Keep bringing up good points in the Google Hangouts. I'll jump back and forth. And one of the problems I want to look at today is when we do have these forces of social change, like what are some of the backlashes of social change? Because not all social change is good. And this first one I want to take a look at is alienation of the people. And basically, the first guy to really understand alienation in terms of modernization was the sociologist we looked at earlier, Emil Durkheim. He was the guy, if we remember earlier, was all about functionalism and that there has to be a function in society. He sort of coins this term anomie, which I'll type out right up here, A-N-O-M-I-E. And that's sort of his term to describe conditions of industrial workers who had no roots or norms and they struggled in their lives. And he sort of looks at society at a time of massive urbanization with the Industrial Revolution in Britain, and he realized these people have been sort of displaced from their original societies, and they really have no roots or anything. So they're sort of alienated from society. They're no longer in the country They're lost in this massive urban sprawl. And he terms those guys, anomi, just describing they have no roots. And it's very, very similar to what Karl Marx, the conflict sociologist and the communist guy, talks about. He takes this term and applies it to the working people, or the proletariat, as he calls. And he claims these workers were exploited and controlled through, employment or housing costs or wages and all that, and could never really reach full potential. And basically, from these two, starting sociologists, this notion has been expanded to mean anyone who really does not share the same values and the same morals of society overall. So, from alienation, especially looking at a teen point of view, like what are some of the effects of alienation on teenagers? Because even within a society of Jasmine, mute the microphone for a second. Hey, Jasmine. Oh, Jesus, it's got feedback. Mute the mic. And, oh, jeez.
Okay. Sorry.
There we go. Oh. Yeah, Jones, just tell Jasmine if she wants, mute the microphone on top and kill her, have her put the, turn the camera off just so that she's able to, that'll take up a lot less bandwidth. That's okay. Tell her she can join the chat. Just turn off the microphone and turn off the camera. But like you were saying, Jones, back to the discussion where you mentioned, yeah, what are the effects of alienation? We do have a disappearing middle class, for example, due to exploitation of the working class. What about teenagers as well? Like if you know somebody who's alienated in school, because that's a social area, like what are some of those effects of alienation? And I know Dev and Emily, you're listening in as well. You can easily type in the sidebar the Google Hangout I have going right now. What are some of those effects of alienation that people feel when they're not in the in crowd? Hey Dev, don't worry. What to do? Just if you're listening to me, just answer the questions on Google Hangouts, and I'll bring them up to the class as a whole. Yeah, great point, Emily. There's this loneliness, there's this depression, there's this isolation when people don't actually feel part of this inner circle here. Humans are very, very much a social animal, that we want to be in the in crowd. We want to be with people, and that's actually a great lead into what we'll look at a little bit, well, actually in the next slide, conformity of people coming to be there, wanting to be accepted. Yeah. Actually, well, I'll save that question for later, but I'm curious, why do you guys think that people want to be accepted so badly? Like, what's so bad about alienation? I think is one of the big questions. Why do we have to be part of the in crowd? Why do teenagers especially really, really feel this need to be cool, to be popular, to fit in? And I'm curious about what your thoughts are coming from, coming from that strata, whereas I'm more of an adult and don't really have those issues actually anymore. Looking to feel important. I like that point, Emily, that we all want to feel like we're contributing in some way, shape, or form to society. I think I would 100% agree with that. And moving on, and keep putting some side points down there on the group chat as well. Yeah, it is nice. Let's be honest. Like humans do, there's probably a brain mechanism and a brain trigger that says if we're loved and we're in the in crowd, yeah, Jasmine, you have someone to be there for you. There's a social animal, and we'll look at when we look at conformity as a force of social change, we'll look at conformity in terms of a social change, but there's also like the psychology of, what it means to be loved, what it means to be human and part of a group that we won't look at right now because we're looking specifically at social change. But I think that you guys bring up some great points right there. And if we move on from alienation, which is being obviously outside, being, sorry, not necessarily outside, but someone who has no roots, someone who's not into society, who doesn't feel a part of society, you come to the opposite of conformity here. And I really, really like the two quotes. Well, obviously the zebras, they all look the same. But I really do like the two quotes. I just found this Japanese proverb right here. The nail that sticks up will be hammered down. And I think that's packs a ton of wisdom into just one solid quote, that people who do tend to And I found this growing up in high school as well. Like, I was someone who wanted to conform to what would be, I don't know, a typical jock persona, I guess. Because, nobody wants to be that one person sticking out. It takes a lot of courage to be that one person to say, I'm not going to follow the in crowd, but rather I'm going to be part of something, something unique into myself. And I think that's what sets around the other quote here is be yourself. Everybody else is taken. That's true. And I found as I grew up, there's a less of a push to conform to others and be sort of more happy with yourself, which is one of the cool things I found about growing up and why I like being 29 much more, 29 right now, much more than I like being 19 10 years ago. So if you guys do feel that sort of alienation and that pressure to conform, don't, is how hard it is, but it does get better. But now I digress. There's a little life lesson for you. Jones, what are you saying here? Do you think that interior motive in individual societies, even if I think the interior motive of individuals. You know what's actually interesting? I'll bring this. Okay, I can bring this up right now. Is that a lot of so Jones basically asks is it an interior motive on the individual to conform? Is it the individual or is it society? There's two really sides to that one. Some people like. A lot of psychiatrists, for example, really believe in the power of the individual, or for the social or the individual to make their own decisions, and it's their fault. But actually, there's a lot of studies out there that would bring up the fact that it's a lot of societal pressure and these social forces that everybody tends to work with and tends to go against them. Like there's some famous experiments, for example. It's called the Asch experiment. I'll write it down here, ASCH. It's called the Asch effect. And he was a psychologist in the 1930s, I believe. And what he did is he brought people into a laboratory, and he made them. You can look it up yourself, and you'll get the gist of it too. But he brought people in, and one person wasn't in, but there were 5 others in on it. So it was like a group of 6. And what had happened was, basically. Sorry, I got some students bothering me right now. What had happened was basically the 5 people all said sort of the wrong answer, and the one person who wasn't in on the experiment, more than 40% of the time actually went along with what they knew was to be the wrong answers, which is kind of interesting, saying that a lot of our social patterns are dictated by the people around us. So it's not so much an individual wanting to be part of the in crowd or anything like that, but it's really a lot of it is the social pressures that people are conforming to and how it's really affecting them. So I can give you a number of, I think a lot of people are familiar also with the Milgram experiment is a popular one where Stanley Milgram had people, they didn't really electrocute people, but made them believe that people would have been electrocuted had they gone along with this experiment, which he basically told people, you're a teacher, and if the learner gets something wrong, what they have to do is you have to sort of quote-unquote shock them. They didn't get a real shock, and what had happened was the learner, the guy in on the experiment, would press a button, and the other guy would do something, and then would say something like, oh, ow, this hurts, why are you doing this? And from there, the volts built up to 450 volts, which is a lethal shock, and what he found was that most people, a full 2/3 of people, because of pressure of an authority figure, actually did, press up to 450 volts, even though they thought it may have killed them. So a couple good experiments to look up, and we can talk about this further, is just putting it... Okay, a few people have class right now. No worries, actually. I was going to cut this off in about 5 minutes' time as a new teacher is going to come in. The last thing I want to say about conformity, and we can keep this up, is basically... Yeah, so basically the last thing I'll say, and I'll cut this out in 2 minutes, conformity is really the act of maintaining a certain degree of similarity. We see it all the time in teenagers trying to have same clothing, and we see that a lot with cliques in terms of, the jocks will have a specific type of wear, the cool girls will have a specific type of wear, or the pretty girls or something, the nerds tend to dress a specific way, the computer geeks, I don't know, anybody, depending also, whatever social cliques are there in society or in school. And basically, conformity implies this, kind of this tendency to submit to others, and basically that's where I'll sort of end it off right now. I don't want to keep more time. I'll put this up on YouTube right now. I'll cut out a lot of the introduction. It was just getting set up. But definitely, guys, why don't we say we'll meet up tomorrow at about 12:30 or so again. We can keep this going. And I like how there were 4 people and plus Dev on the side here listening in and watching. Let's see if we can't get some more people on this video discussion and get it more back and forth. But there's only a few more slides I have to go through. But no, it's great being able to discuss with you guys one-on-one, and I hope you had a good time listening to this, or at least being more informative than simply a screencast of mine. So no problem, Emily. If you can't because of student council, do what you have to do, but I'll definitely post this. And we can have a lot more of these informal discussions if you guys want. If there's something that you think that this is a better way to learn, it makes it more classy. You know, I could be on for a long period of time getting into discussions and things like that. So let me know what you think. I'm going to stop the broadcast right now. Yes, Emily, I agree as well. It was fun for me too. I'll stop the broadcast. Okay, take care, Jones. Have a good one. I'll stop the broadcast or else I'm talking for another 10 minutes here. And I'll post this up on YouTube for everybody. Take care, guys. Have a good one. Bye.